Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to our channel. I'm sure you've all seen the news: strikes, energy shortages, economic headwinds, and fiscal uncertainty. Things are spiraling out of control faster than anyone expected. If you think the economy is in a tough spot now, just wait. Today, we're going to break down how these seemingly disparate global events are actually part of a much bigger, interconnected economic crisis. Buckle up because the worst has yet to come, and it's time to see the full picture behind the chaos. Let's start with the United States. A new development popped up this week that might go unnoticed by many, but it should set alarm bells ringing for anyone paying attention to the economy: the looming dockworker strike threatening to bring America's ports on the east and Gulf coasts to a grinding halt. Now, a dockworker strike is not just an isolated labor dispute. This is part of a long-standing issue of wage stagnation, labor exploitation, and the unstoppable wave of automation driving labor unrest across industries. While workers fight for a wage increase, the deal currently proposes a 62% increase over 6 years, which is truly a huge number. The real dispute, the elephant in the room, is about automation. If you're a dockworker, you're acutely aware that machines are slowly but surely replacing your job. Think about the ripple effect here. If the 47,000-member International Longshoremen's Association decides to strike on January 16, it will paralyze approximately two-thirds of America's major ports. Ask yourself, what happens when the busiest shipping hubs in the U.S. stop operating? Shortages. Supply chain disruptions. Consumer panic. Higher prices. And all of this comes at a time when the economy is already feeling the pressure. You might recall the chaos in 2021 when just one key port in California, Los Angeles, experienced congestion. It caused delays, increased costs, and exacerbated already spiraling inflation. Now extrapolate that scenario to all ports on the eastern and Gulf coasts. Why does it matter? Well, the IMF has warned inflation remains one of the US's core economic challenges, and a port disruption will only fan those flames. What comes next? Higher costs for goods, from cars to electronics to essential goods like food, fuel, and clothing. And, don't forget the global economic implications of that strike either, since America imports significant volumes of goods from places like China, Mexico, and the European Union. A worsening supply bottleneck from the strike could put further pressure on the already struggling global economy. Just as America faces its domestic crisis, we look across the Atlantic to a continent that has barely scraped through one disaster only to face another: Europe. The crux of the problem? Russia's continued stranglehold on Europe's energy supply. More than a year after Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine, Europe is still being whipsawed by instability in its gas supply because of its dependence on Russian natural gas. That brings us to the natural gas transit deal between Russia and Ukraine, which officially expired at the beginning of this year. What does that mean? No more deliveries of Russian gas through Ukraine, a critical corridor that continued to supply Europe despite the war. It's now completely evaporated. Don't be fooled by the more stable situation through the past few months. Europe stocked up frantically in the summer of 2024, pushing natural gas prices lower. But this is just the calm before the storm, because without Russian supply, Europe's energy security teeters on a knife's edge. Even though alternative supplies like LNG, liquefied natural gas, have stepped in, infrastructure limitations, especially import terminals and pipelines, introduce bottlenecks. Think about rising natural gas prices as more than just an energy cost. Energy is one of the biggest components of inflation, dragging up the overall cost of living. Europe has seen sustained inflation pushing food prices and goods higher, with Eurozone inflation averaging 6% over 2024 but still showing signs of persistence. For energy-intensive sectors like steel manufacturing, glass blowing, and even agriculture, rising gas prices could spell disaster. It becomes increasingly expensive to power plants or produce fertilizers, and who do you think will ultimately pay the price? Consumers and businesses. Europe might be facing a green transition, but there's no way of escaping the fact that energy insecurity creates serious challenges for governments already struggling to contain inflation. Now, let's zoom down to Puerto Rico, which faced island-wide blackouts after its fragile energy grid collapsed again. 85% of the population, about 1.4 million residents, were thrust into total darkness. Power was restored after 24 to 48 hours in some areas, but the underlying problem hasn't been solved. Puerto Rico's grid failures are more than just local problems, they point to a growing problem across many regions of America. Decades of underinvestment, a lack of basic upkeep, and a constant battering from natural disasters have left the island's grid in tatters. But don't stop there. This energy nightmare reflects what we're seeing across the entire country, especially when it comes to climate resilience and infrastructure spending. The Biden administration passed the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, IIJA, but it's like throwing a cup of water at an inferno. The total bill allocated $65 billion for modernizing America's electrical grid, and yet the reality is far bleaker. The American Civil Society of Engineers still rates U.S. infrastructure at a D+, pointing to the problematic state of roads, bridges, power lines, and transit systems. Without reliable energy and infrastructure, productivity collapses, and let's face it, no modern economy can operate without energy. Puerto Rico may be a U.S. territory facing its challenges, but these are a microcosm of the larger impending American infrastructure crisis if urgent rehabilitation efforts don't step up. How much longer can we kick the can down the road? Let's shift gears, literally, and look at the auto industry, specifically at Mazda's surprising good fortune in a challenging market. Mazda is ending 2024 on a high, having sold more than 420,000 vehicles in the US while expecting to cross 450,000 next year. What makes this surprising? Mazda has managed this feat without a single fully electric vehicle in its lineup. Mazda's success, while impressive, is emblematic of a troubling trend beneath the shine. Global auto markets are sluggish, electric vehicle adoption remains slower than expected in key regions, and competition is fiercer than ever. The industry pushes ahead with strict emissions regulations, particularly in the European Union and China, yet many players are finding it increasingly difficult to make the full transition to EVs while managing razor-thin margins. Here's the deal, though. Mazda's ability to ride its crossover and SUV wave might look like an industry success story, but it could quickly turn into a cautionary tale. Longer term, it's a risky strategy not to have strong positions in electric vehicles, given governments around the world are moving fiercely to ban gasoline cars by 2035. The clock is ticking, and Mazda, along with other legacy automakers, may watch their advantage evaporate rapidly. Finally, let's turn our attention to U.S. Treasuries, where the dynamics of the world's biggest bond market are shifting in dangerous ways. The so-called primary dealers club, once the envy of Wall Street, is becoming a place fewer institutions want to be part of. Why? Because of the sheer scale of America's debt load spiraling past $29 trillion, and it's only going to get worse. At first glance, many Americans might not care about treasuries or where the government borrows from, but here's the catch: when demand for U.S. government bonds falls, the cost of borrowing for the United States rises, and the result is skyrocketing interest bills that taxpayers will bear, either directly through taxes or indirectly through cuts to services. Increased government borrowing also competes with private investment. As the Fed raises interest rates, corporations wanting to borrow find it more expensive to finance their businesses. Therefore, private entrepreneurs and small businesses lose out as the government edges them out of cheaper credit. This is what we call crowding out, and it's going to have ripple effects on job growth, innovation, and everyday life for Americans. So, folks, here we are. Interconnected crises across America, Europe, and beyond. Strikes paralyzing ports, energy insecurity fanning inflation, fragile infrastructure collapsing, an auto industry living on borrowed time, and a bond market collapsing under the weight of America's own debt. The world economy isn't just facing one problem. We are on the verge of multiple crises, rapidly converging to create a perfect storm. The global economy is being hemorrhaged by incompetence, short-termism, and a complete inability to face reality, much less plan for it. Demand urgent changes in how governments manage the economy, or the next economic recession will make the previous downturns look like a picnic. Stay tuned to our channel for the latest updates, and be prepared, time's ticking.